Joe Simpson and his 21-year-old climbing partner Simon Yates were descending the remote Siula Grande, which was hard to get up but even harder to get down. When Simpson broke his leg, they both feared it was a death sentence. Yates gave him a couple of paracetamol, dug himself into a bucket seat in the snow, and lowered the stricken Simpson down the mountain slope, paying out 300 feet of rope, then climbing down and doing it again and again for hours. A blizzard blew in. Simpson was lowered over an overhanging ledge, and at that point the rope ran out. Dangling above the yawning maw of a crevasse, Simpson knew, and knew that Yates knew, that eventually his partner would lose his seating and tumble past him, killing them both. Yates made what seemed the only possible choice. He severed the rope to save himself. The next morning, Yates trudged back up to base camp, believing Simpson was dead. But he wasn't. This is one of the most remarkable survival stories you will ever read. The story starts on the morning of June 5th, 1985 in the Andes mountain range in Peru, South America. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, two experienced climbers, set out to climb Siula Grande, a huge mountain whose summit reaches 6,344 meters above sea level. That morning, Joe and Simon started the climb in alpine style, meaning they only bring their climbing gear, clothing, and food with them. Once the ascent begins, the two friends are alone and have no contact with the outside world. They know that in case of trouble or accident, no one will come to rescue them. The first day of climbing goes well, and they decide to spend their first night in a hole they dig in the snow. Indeed, the climb is so difficult that it takes several days to complete. The next day, the two climbers already reach the 6,000-meter mark. At this altitude, they face many dangers. The temperatures are freezing, and the wind can blow fiercely. Oxygen is becoming scarce, and their bodies slow down. After a second night on the edge of the void, Joe and Simon finally reach the mountain's summit. They're exhausted and celebrate their victory timidly because they well know that 80% of climbing accidents happen during the descent. Barely having started the descent, Joe and Simon notice that the route they are taking is much more dangerous than expected. They are surrounded by deadly cornices and empty spaces. To make matters worse, bad weather rolls in, and 30 minutes after leaving the summit, they lose their route. It's already late, and blinded by the bad weather, the two men decide to stop and wait for the next day. Again, they dig a hole in the snow and quickly take refuge there. But that night, while melting snow with their small stove, their last gas bottle runs out. From now on, it's simple. They can no longer melt snow for water. It's the fourth day of the expedition. The sky is blue, and even though they have no water, the two climbers are smiling. They have already descended the most difficult part of the mountain. Their expedition is almost in the bag. While leading the way, Joe suddenly faces a threshold to cross. A threshold is like a big step several meters high that must be climbed down. But when he plants his ice axe and lets himself fall, Joe's anchor breaks and he falls. He lands on his feet, but his crampon gets stuck. His entire weight falls on it, and inevitably, his leg bone breaks. Immediately, he realizes his fate is sealed. At 6,000 meters altitude, with a broken leg and no chance of rescue, he will never make it down the mountain. Worse, if Simon wants to survive unscathed, he will have to abandon him. But Simon doesn't abandon him. On the contrary, he devises a system to lower Joe with a rope. Simon wraps the rope around his waist, sits down, and digs his crampons into the snow. He slowly begins to slide the rope. And it works. Joe descends the cliff face. But it's a race against time. Joe is in shock and lost a liter of blood and is severely dehydrated. To top it off, night falls and a snowstorm rises. As Joe continues to descend, the slope becomes steeper. He doesn't know yet that he's heading toward a precipice. He begs Simon to stop, but because of the storm, Simon can't hear him. Joe, sliding at full speed, reaches the precipice edge, then falls into the void. The rope immediately tightens and locks into Simon's belay device. When Joe regains consciousness, he realizes he's hanging in space, 25 meters above a glacier. Despite his broken leg, Joe tries to climb up but fails. Simon understands his friend is trapped, but the rope between them is so taut that Simon cannot descend himself. Hours pass, and at some point, Simon no longer has the strength to hold his companion. Slowly, he slips toward the void, seemingly pulled to his death. Both Joe and Simon will fall and die. Suddenly, Simon remembers a small knife in the top back pocket of his backpack. He hesitates, then decides. He takes out the knife and cuts the rope in one quick motion. Joe immediately falls. He hits the ground violently 25 meters below and breaks through a layer of ice. He continues falling and plunges into a huge crevasse before finally landing on a small ledge. Joe has just fallen 50 meters. He can't believe it. He's still alive. He turns on his headlamp and looks around. Nothing but darkness. He realizes the ledge he landed on is tiny. If he had landed a few centimeters away, he would have fallen much deeper and been swallowed by the glacier's depths. He regains his composure and tries to understand what happened. He pulls the rope, but strangely feels no resistance. He pulls again and again until suddenly the rope falls on top of him. He grabs the end and discovers it has been cut. He immediately understands that Simon cut the rope to save his own life. A bittersweet feeling washes over him. Simon is still alive and will be able to help him out of the crevasse. For hours, Joe screams, hoping to be heard, but no one comes. Alone in the dark at the bottom of his hole, Joe loses control of his emotions. He screams, punches the ice, and breaks down in tears. It is now the 5th day of the expedition. Simon, who hasn't moved and dug a hole to pass the night, is convinced Joe is dead. Before moving on, he goes to the cliff edge and spots below the huge 12-meter-wide crevasse Joe fell into the day before. He rappels down to the crevasse's edge and calls Joe without real hope. His face disfigured by cold, dehydrated and exhausted, Simon doesn't insist. His companion has no chance of survival. He resumes his journey to base camp. On the way, he wonders how he'll explain his decision. Should he tell the truth or lie? After all, there were no witnesses. But he finally reaches the base camp, and he meets Richard Hawking, the camp guardian and a mutual friend of both climbers. He recounts his ordeal and confesses that to save his own life, he had to cut the rope connecting him to Joe. He condemned his partner to death. At the bottom of the crevasse, Joe realizes no one will come for him and accepts that he must get out alone. With the little energy left, he first tries to climb the vertical wall leading out of the abyss. He quickly gives up. Even in his best shape, it would be impossible. Then, he takes a gamble. Instead of seeking to climb out, he rappels deeper into the crevasse in hopes of another exit. Before starting, he makes 2 decisions. First, not to look down for fear of seeing only the void. Second, to not tie a knot at the end of his 50-meter rope. That way, if there's no exit, the rope will slip through his hands, and he will fall into the glacier's deep void to finally die. He starts, and after 25 meters of rappel, miraculously, he reaches another small ledge. Looking up, he sees a gently rising slope and a beam of light in the ceiling. Joe is ecstatic. He just found another exit. Exhausted but happy, he finally climbs out of the crevasse, lies down in the snow, and looks at the sky. But maybe Joe's joy was premature. He is still on the glacier, and he has kilometers to crawl before reaching base camp. To move forward, Joe has no choice but to crawl. Luckily, he finds Simon's footprints and follows them. On the morning of the 6th day, Joe hasn't drunk or eaten for 3 days. After a while, he finally spots some rocks, indicating he's near the end of the glacier crossing. He immediately sheds all his gear to lighten his load and wraps his leg in his foam mattress to make a splint. With immense effort, he continues toward base camp. It's the morning of the 7th day. At base camp, Simon has begun to mourn his friend. Richard, the camp guardian, is worried about Simon's health. His frostbites aren't healing, and his mental state is fragile. Together, they burn Joe's belongings as a way to say goodbye. Then they decide to leave the next morning. It's 4 p.m. when Joe reaches a lake below the glacier. He knows base camp lies beyond this lake. But just as he starts to rejoice, doubt creeps in. Is Simon still at base camp or already gone? Joe has been missing for 3 days. Why would his companions stay at camp waiting when he believes Joe is dead? Joe is devastated but refuses to give up. For hours he crawls, completely disoriented. Sometimes he loses consciousness, then wakes and crawls a few meters before passing out again. At nightfall, a strong smell pulls him from his delirium. Joe is actually lying at the base camp latrine area. He's very close to the tents. Desperate, he screams, hoping to attract Simon's attention. At the same time, Richard is awakened by cries outside. Doubt strikes him. Is it Joe? No, that's impossible. The man died 4 days ago. Simon also wakes to screams. Most importantly, he hears his name clearly. He immediately jumps up and goes outside. Walking toward the cries, he comes face to face with Joe, just 80 meters from camp. He can't believe it. Joe is alive. Simon grabs him and takes him to shelter. After climbing a 6,344-meter mountain, breaking his leg, being left for dead in a crevasse, and crawling kilometers without food or water, Joe Simpson is finally safe. After 7 days in the mountain, Joe lost a third of his total body weight. He's carried to civilization on a mule and taken to the hospital 11 days after breaking his leg. After 2 years and 6 operations, Joe returns to climbing. Back in England, Simon is criticized for cutting his partner's rope. But Joe has always defended Simon, saying the act saved both their lives and that he would have done the same in Simon's place. There you have it. Now you know the full story of this completely crazy adventure. If you enjoyed this incredible survival story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing adventures. Thanks for watching.